Thanks.
You know, in the introduction that we just had, he discussed the challenge we had, which was building a studio. That's one challenge, I think. You could start a new franchise, and you could build a studio, and that process might take years and months of sweat and toil. But we had two challenges, and the first, of course, was to build that studio, and the second was to take over a beloved franchise that people had already established a lot of loyalty to and love for and expectation for. And we're all in the industry in this room, and we've seen franchises change hands and watch that process from a distance. And I think about things like Infinity Ward with Call of Duty, but being right in there, suddenly you have this tremendous amount of focus and pressure on your team and on the project, and an audience that demands excellence and has good reason to be cynical and doubtful about what's coming next, especially when it's a big corporation like Microsoft, or in Infinity Ward's case, Activision. But we don't have a very good context for some of the tribulations that other teams have gone through in that scenario.
Yeah, and I should start by saying I think we have a hard time believing that we have anything we can teach any of you. But certainly, it has been a really unique experience. And you know, it's funny, when we initially spoke to Martin about doing the Communicate keynote, I was kind of like, man, why can't we be like innovate or entertain? But you know, in thinking about it, it became a really interesting framework to look at the last 4 years. And I actually thank Martin for having the foresight to ask us to do this keynote, because you know, when we started 343 and we started on this sort of journey to understand where we wanted Halo to go and what we wanted to do, you know, it was really, it was sort of this 10-year plan, of which Halo 4 was the first step. But we had this journey we wanted to take players and viewers and readers on, but we didn't have a relationship with the audience or with the community. They had this relationship with the IP, but it wasn't a relationship as 343 we had. And so Communicate became a really vital pillar for us in kind of charting a path and being able to communicate what that journey was going to be for people, and getting them on board with us and building the trust and building credibility. And when we looked at that, there was really, you know, there was sort of this transmedia vision we had, and sort of the how and the what's of what we communicated to that audience became really critical. And I think there were really sort of two big primary audiences that we needed to be able to have sort of join us. One was the sort of wider Halo audience, which includes people who enjoy the universe and the books and the motion comics and the games. And then there's sort of the Halo community, which is a smaller but very vocal and dynamic group.
Yeah, and I think that when we think of transmedia in this business and in this industry, I think we think about it in a lot of different ways. It's franchise expansion, it's business, of course, it's storytelling, and it's a way to make your product reach certainly a wider audience than it might in the narrow confines of just the gaming industry or the console business as we're stuck in. But it's also a super effective communication tool. And you can communicate an awful lot of things through transmedia experiences, and they don't just have to be commerce, and they don't have to just be naked storytelling. You can communicate broader visions, you can communicate ideas, and you can communicate real details out into the community that's waiting, in our case, for a game that wasn't going to ship for another 2 or 3 years, depending on when people first started to engage in our transmedia stuff. So we continually thought of transmedia not so much as a commerce possibility, and it works really well as that. Halo has a great, successful transmedia business. We have New York Times best-selling novels, we have digital series, we have anime, we have comic books. That whole range of products, I think over 1,500 retail SKUs at this point in the Halo universe, everything from bobbleheads to pajamas and everything in between. But the most important aspects of transmedia for us are the storytelling vehicles. and they come in all shapes and sizes. The novels have been a huge part of what we've done in the Halo universe ever since Fall of Reach, back actually literally before the game launched. The first ever Halo product that the audience was exposed to was actually a novel. One of our franchise people back at Microsoft corporate, a guy called Eric Nyland, helped us create a novel called The Fall of Reach months before the game even launched, and that was pure opportunism. But it helped plant a seed for using transmedia in our franchise as a tactic, and then a strategy, an umbrella strategy for how we communicate the nature of the universe, the details of the universe, and the backstory of that universe out to audiences who can then share it. And the number of people who read our novels, they're all but 2 of them are New York Times bestsellers, but it's still a very, very tiny subset of the game audience. But those people are torchbearers, and they take that message out, and they sort of they help us spread the word, as it were, as far as Halo's transmedia ambitions are concerned.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we're fortunate in the Halo audience is really diverse. You know, there are people who really are very invested in the universe and the fiction in the universe, whether it's in books or motion comics or any of the linear projects that we've done. There are people who are very much about the campaign experience, about sitting down and getting through the whole campaign and sort of that immersive first-person experience. And there's a whole set of people who are really all about the multiplayer, and there's sort of ranges in between. So when we looked at, you know, how do you communicate? How do we as a studio start to talk to all of those different audiences in ways that are meaningful to them? Obviously, we do that through the mediums in which we tell stories. But what became really important for us to be able to do was really to define what is a sort of binding theme and message that we can make sure, no matter what we're doing and how we're doing it or where we're doing it, there's always a consistency of theme, so everyone understands always what the Halo universe is about, whether they're playing a game or reading a book or engaging in any part of the universe. There has to be some binding elements that they're investing in. And so for us, we did a lot of work to really understand, you know, what we believed Halo meant, and in thinking about where we wanted to go, what we took forward. And we sort of distilled down to what we ended up calling the Halo beliefs, which were sort of what the emotional core to us of what Halo was, so that could become a language and a vocabulary for us that we could seed in everything that we did. And I won't go into a lot of details, but it was basically 4 beliefs. And the first was heroism, and this idea that heroes are important, and that there's a hero in every one of us. Everyone has the potential to be a hero, and the strength and the courage to take that path is kind of at the heart of a lot of our Halo stories. You know, and the idea that heroes are born of sacrifice. That was probably something that obviously as we embarked on Master Chief's next story was really critical. Humanity was another core belief, and really the idea that humanity was something worth saving, and being able to connect players or readers to a human element, and that they're part of something bigger, and that the stakes aren't just always humans versus aliens, but it's sort of a deeper idea of humanity. The third was mystery. You know, we are a sci-fi IP, and the sense of discovery and wonder and fear and exploration was something we wanted to permeate everything that we did. And the last was creativity. You know, the idea that, 343 doesn't own the Halo universe. Everybody does. Everyone has an opportunity to contribute to it and be part of it, and it's an inclusive environment. And so we took those beliefs, and that just became the sort of the central message of everything that we did. And I would say storytelling is probably the primary communication method we used for delivering that message. But it really involved that crossing over a whole bunch of different executions.
Yeah, and I think that we talk about those pillars, and we talk about the storytelling as a communication tool, and it's internal and external. Most of the work that we do is in storytelling ends up facing the public. And it all has to tie together. We made a decision about 4 years ago that every single story that we were ever going to tell in the Halo universe had to matter. And it had to matter both in terms of the forward-facing plot of the universe and the work that we were going to do for the next 10 years. It had to matter to the player. It had to matter to the reader. In the case of the novels, it had to matter to the viewer. And it all had to connect. And we had to strike a really careful balance between telling these elaborate, wide-ranging transmedia stories, but making sure that each piece of story stands on its own, and that none of them are required for a full understanding of the game, which ends up being the core part of what we're doing. So if you've read a Halo novel, you'll have a better, deeper, and maybe richer understanding of things that are then happening in the game. But there will be a lot of redundancy for you. We'll be retelling a lot of those stories within the game because we can't expect people who we're asking to spend $60 in a game to need to spend $10 on a novel, or to need to have watched a TV commercial, or to need to have watched our digital TV series. So we have to make sure that our communication is this huge, broad umbrella that makes the super invested player or reader or viewer feel that that investment is really paying off, and they can be surprised and delighted when they see these connections made. But we also have to make sure that if you're a sampler and you just come in and pick any one of these experiences, that will tell a complete, engaging, and ultimately satisfying story on its own merits. But it also gives us internally a bunch of tools that we can use. The fact that we have 3 novels that deal with what we call contemporary Halo fiction by a novelist called Karen Travis, that helps us as a developer understand the fake history that we've created for our universe. So we're then able to pick dates and events and characters from other places in the universe just as if it were real history. So imagine you're making a movie about World War II. You have this incredibly rich tapestry of events and characters and situations that you can then pull from. Well, our transmedia stuff also gives us that. So the artists and the writers and the designers are never short of concepts or ideas. They're already firmly grounded in our canon. And that's really what it is in terms of an internal communication tool. And some people often talk about the Halo Story Bible as if it's the secret dusty tome that we have hidden away. And it's really a collection of things. And I would say about 85% of those are available to everybody to read or watch or experience and ingest. And they're a super valuable communication tool for us internally as well as externally. We have another series of novels which does something a lot subtler, which we call the Foreigner Trilogy. It's by a sci-fi novelist called Greg Bear. And it helps us create a mythos that goes back to a couple of the pillars that Kiki was talking about, which are really mystery and in some ways humanity. He mostly deals with alien species, but he tells a story that takes place about 100,000 years before the events of Halo that sets up our underlying mythos, the sort of the drive for evolution that humanity and other species have. And again, you don't need to read any of this stuff to understand it when you're playing the game, but elements from those novels will pop up, and sometimes larger than life in really important ways. And for people who have invested in that, there's a really deep satisfaction from having a really grounded understanding of it, and mostly looking forward to it. They'll hear about a mysterious character called the Didact, and someone who's never touched the rest of this transmedia stuff will encounter this character, the Didact, and think, well, he's a bad guy, I understand what his motivations are, and he's mean, now I've got to try and destroy him. But somebody who's read the Greg Bear novels, for example, will have a completely different understanding of that person, and will start to look for certain aspects of his character to show up in the game, and we try to pay that off. But even our marketing material is designed to do that, designed to feed a message and a communication strategy out into the broader audience and back into our team. And more importantly, it means something. It's all connected. We did a couple of TV commercials this year. One we called The Commissioning, which took place on the Starship Infinity, and you saw it being drawn into this world. And it was really just a preview of the big events from the game. And it features characters and Easter eggs that are taken from the game and put out in our commercial. And we had another one called Scanned, which we worked with David Fincher on, which took that same process a little bit further. And all of the storytelling in that marketing is paid off either in the game or in future projects, which we will be working on. And it all means something. And every single piece of it is taken from a real history. So when we're working with the commercial directors, even though in some ways they're further ahead of us on the development curve, just because of the nature of the game development schedule, we're able to give them all the materials, resources, and details that they need to build this stuff and have it matter. And more importantly, it also helps them understand what commercial they want to make. We didn't tell them, do this, here's a storyboard. We worked with their directors and their visualizers and said, what kind of story do we need to tell? What kind of story do you want to tell? Here's the ingredients. They already exist. We've already built this very, very deep foundation. And it's helped, if you think about that as the Halo Story Bible, it's helped make our jobs a lot easier. And so that when we're talking to our internal art team or our designers or our developers, that they already have this depth and wealth of knowledge to work with, and a giant wiki of material to pick and choose from.
Yeah, and I would say as storytellers, it's an amazing creative opportunity. Halo has killed off a lot of its characters in the past. We've decided to invest in more characters, keep some more alive. But one of the interesting things that we did was Thomas Lasky is a character which we really carried through our entire Halo 4 experience, if you think about that as kind of everything on that vastly complex chart. We introduced him as a young cadet in the Forward Unto Dawn linear series, and it was so cool to be able to explore a character differently than we're able to do in the game. And so we were able to take a little bit more time and explore sort of a stage in his development, which you wouldn't necessarily want to explore in a game, and do that in the linear piece leading up into the start of Halo 4, the game proper. And of course, in the game, you're introduced to him as an adult. His path crosses again with Master Chief. He then becomes sort of a really central character on the Infinity and through the Spartan Ops experience, and someone will carry forward. But we were able to carry him as a character and introduce him before the game started. A lot of people would not have seen him before the game. They could then go back to Forward Unto Dawn, understand a little bit more about him. But again, as storytellers, we got to explore him really differently. And that was exciting, and for the people, again, who do enjoy looking at all the different pieces, their understanding of him is very different from someone who maybe only experiences him in the campaign, and that's something we'll definitely want to continue doing.
Yeah. And he was a vessel that specifically we were able to imbue with a bunch of communication tasks. So Forward Unto Dawn comes out months before the game comes out, and he brings you up to speed on how the Halo universe kind of works, and what they're all fighting for, and how we got into this conflict that you then resolve in the game in the first place. And he literally introduces you to the Master Chief, and he introduces you to the notion of heroism. And again, all the pillars that Kiki talked about, it was his job as a vessel to carry them through. It made him difficult to cast. Yes. But we finally got at least his hair right by the time we were done. So.
Yeah, barely. So I'm subtly moving this along.
Yeah. So, so yeah, we just talked about a wide audience. And I think sometimes we mistakenly think about the wide audience as the community. Well, it's not. The community is a subset of the wider audience. And it's very, very, very different. You can't speak to a big mainstream, in Halo's case, maybe 8 to 10 million consumers, in the same way that you can speak directly to the community, which is this subset of literally experts. I mean, they often literally know way more about our universe than we do. And you have to strike a careful balance between having a conversation with that community and letting them behind the curtain and sharing with them and taking their opinions and their feedback and their criticism seriously, while understanding that they are a subset of that wider audience, and they're not necessarily representative of it. They have the loudest voices, they have the most information, they have the strongest opinions. And you can certainly, if you think about things like forums, watch that community absolutely tear itself apart with differing opinions, all of which are right, because it's ultimately a subjective medium. So if one of our community members thinks that the battle rifle is wildly overpowered, and the guy sitting next, the bolt shot, is wildly overpowered, and the guy next to him says that's simply not a problem, they have to have that argument, and you have to take it seriously. And we, as a studio, I think Bungie started this tradition. They always had a great relationship with their community, and they started pretty small and turned it into something big. And kind of, I think in some ways we're standard bearers along with Blizzard for how you talk to your community. And we had to take that baton, but it was red hot when it was handed to us, because we literally had never shipped a single game. We weren't a real studio. When we got that baton, there were about 12 of us. And we were, again, tasked with building this enormous studio, but we're also tasked with satisfying that community, a very vociferous, opinionated, and powerful, and frankly, pretty intelligent and thoughtful community. And we were handed this red-hot baton and asked to run with it, and they had zero reason to trust us. And it's a process. You know, communication is it's not a message that you fire and forget. It is a constant, ongoing thing that you have to manage and nurture, and we're still doing that with the community. We still have to earn their trust. We did well, I think, with Halo 4, but we learned a lot in that process, and we're still learning a lot. And that community helps us have a beacon or a locus around which to gather and have those conversations, while still being mindful of the fact that there are about 9 million other players who really don't care about that stuff, or care about different things, or care about different sets of problems.
Yeah, and I think what was critical for us was from the beginning to make sure that communication with the community was two-way. You know, we invited them in early on to help share in the process of building our studio, right? And you know, part of that meant for us being really open and honest with the community about the things we were struggling with, the things that we thought we were doing right, and the things that we weren't doing right, and the mistakes that we were making. And that had to be sort of a constant dialogue. Again, that idea of kind of getting people on this journey with us was hypercritical with the community. And you know, so we took a very open door approach, which was painful at times, because we really wanted the community to be part of, hopefully, our success and helping to build our success.
Yeah, and if you think about the community as an extension of your own team, if you have a video game studio, and a lot of people in this audience do, think about a community as an extension of your own team with no volume control, no HR resources breathing down their neck for their bluntly, nakedly stated opinions, and no filter.
Yes,
and
check my Twitter feed.
Yeah, that can actually, death threats aside, that can actually be really useful, and it can help you. It can help you and your team look at problem spaces in the product that you're making under a really big microscope. Now, the community it's hard for a community to be right because it's so many different voices and so many contradictory opinions. But there's an art, I think, to teasing out what's real, what's imagined, or what's necessary. The one thing that the community demands most of all is evolution. They want the game to go forward. However, the community also demands equally vociferously that you do not change anything ever. And that's a really difficult tension for any studio to deal with, let alone a new one. And I think that we certainly felt the heat of that scrutiny when we took over the franchise, because we had to evolve it just to take the game forward, just as everyone in this industry is trying to take their games forward. We had to evolve it in ways that mapped to our studio's tastes and abilities and talent and drive, but we also had to try and respect the core principles of this game that people loved, and deal with the resistance to change, and again, the contradictory demand for evolution from the same segment of your audience, and trying to tell them, it's easy to give people good news, but sometimes there's bad news. Sometimes you can't do everything that they asked for, and sometimes it's simply not possible. So our community manager, Jessica Shea, is at the tip of that spear, and I sometimes say she is by far the hardest, or at least the most personal job in the whole studio.
Yeah. And so, you know, we kind of talked about those two big audiences. Obviously, we couldn't do any of that without first being able to sort of drive these values and beliefs within the studio. You know, it kind of all starts at home. The studio and the team needed to be part of defining what those Halo beliefs were and what those values were that we spoke about with the community in terms of being open and honest and self-aware. And so all of that really needed to start with us as a studio, understanding and really internalizing all of these pieces. You know, every artist and coder and designer and tester needed to understand and have those halo beliefs as much as anyone else, because those needed to come through in everything that they executed, so that everyone has a responsibility for delivering, for both defining and delivering that message in all of the things that they do. It was interesting to see how those beliefs, which were really focused on the IP and the game and kind of the values we adopted in how we communicated with the community, were really core to how we grew as a studio and what our sort of core beliefs and values were as a team in a studio. It really wasn't until after we were done and kind of looking back on the last 4 years that became really clear. They were just so tightly intertwined. You know, it's definitely been a journey for us. We feel incredibly proud of what the team has done, you know, the journey continues. It was kind of a baby step that we took, and I think we feel good about taking a step in the right direction, but we certainly really only started to scratch the surface of what we wanted to do.
Yeah, and you know, communication, I think ultimately it's most successful when it's a two-way process. I think there's modes of communication that we do and do well that are one way. Our marketing tends to be a one-way communication process. Certainly our advertising is, and bluntly our storytellers, the most one-way thing that we ever communicate. We tell people what the story is, and they either like it or they don't. We can adapt to that, but that's not a conversation. And I think where communication becomes its most vital and its most powerful is when it is two-way, when you can put information out, get a reaction, and take the information that you get from that reaction to make your products and your studio and your people better, and learn from it constantly and evolve with it. So those are our pillars now. They may change over the years, but they will still be core principles to how we started and what we genuinely believe is the right course for this franchise, the studio, and the community for the next 10 years.
And then there's the miscommunication.
Yes, so we don't do everything right.
Yeah.
We make terrible errors. I mean, when you communicate that much to so many people, to so many disparate audiences, you're going to make an awful lot of mistakes and goofs. But I think if you're open with your teams, with your business, with your corporate overlords in some cases, but especially with your audience, if you make that communication as open as your digital rights management will allow, I think you benefit from it. And I think both the audience and the teams benefit from the two-way nature of that process.